From translation, NIV New International Version, this 151 day of the year, today we are reading passages Esther 6-10, Esther chapter 6, verses 1 to 14. That night the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought and read to him. It was found recorded there how Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor or recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected for him. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, Who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So Haman said to the king, For the man the king delights to honor, have a royal robe brought which the king himself has worn, and a horse with a royal crest on its head. Let robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, said the king, get the robe and the horse and do just as Mordecai says. Leave nothing out of all that you have suggested. So Haman got the robe and the horse, robed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Afterward Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman rushed home, with his head covered in grief. When he told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wisest friends and his wife Zeresh said to him, Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him, you will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried him off to the banquet Esther had prepared. Esther chapter 7, verses 1-10. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther, and as they were drinking wine on that second day, the king again asked Esther, Queen Esther, What is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition. And spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther said, An adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king rose in anger and left the banquet hall. But Haman stayed to beg Queen Esther for his life, for he realized that the king had already determined his fate to be with Esther. As the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, A gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king, stands at Haman's house in the city of Susa. The king said, Hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Esther chapter 8, verses 1-17. That same day King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the scheme of Haman the Agagite, and to spare her people. She also gave him a full account of what he had done to her. The king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she rose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if I have found favor with him, and if the matter seems right to the king and I am pleasing to him, let an order be written overruling the dispatches of Haman son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Because I have given Esther the house of Haman, and because he has been hanged on the gallows because he attacked the Jews, write in the king's name as you please, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. At once the secretary were summoned, on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. They wrote out all Mordecai's instructions to the Jews, to the satraps, the governors and the nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. These were written in the script of each province and the language of each people. The dispatches were sent out by couriers on horses, who rode fast and hard in the king's urgent business, to all the royal provinces, that the Jews might be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to all the peoples, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the royal horses, raced out, urged on by the king's command. The edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he wore royal blue and white, a large crown of gold and a purple robe of fine linen, and the city of Susa rejoiced and rejoiced. For the Jews it was a time of joy and happiness, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews, because fear of the Jews had seized them. Esther chapter 9, verses 1-32 in the 12th month, the month of Adar, on its 13th day, when the royal edict and decree were about to be executed, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. But it was turned to the contrary, so that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities, in all the provinces of King Xerxes, to attack those seeking their destruction. No one could stand against them, because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. And all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the officials of the king supported the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parshandasa, Dalphon, Espasa, Porasa, Adalia, Aridasa, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vesasa, the 10 sons of Haman son of Hamidasa, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request?" "It will also be granted. If it pleases the king," Esther answered, "give the Jews in Susa permission to do tomorrow also what they have done today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on gallows." So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed and destroyed their enemies and accomplished what they desired on those who hated them. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages and unwalled towns, celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving gifts to each other. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and sending gifts of food to each other and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman son of Hamidasa, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the pur, that is, the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that Haman's vile scheme, which he had devised against the Jews, should be reversed, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore these days were called Purim, from the word pur. Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it upon themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them without fail should observe these 2 days every year, in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of them die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. Dispatches were sent to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the empire, giving them words of peace and security, and these days of Purim were to be observed at their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. Esther chapter 10, verses 1-3. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its farthest shores. And all his powerful and mighty deeds are recorded in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia, which his officials are in charge of. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Xerxes, great among the Jews, and held in high esteem by many because of his good deeds for his people, and for speaking up to the king about all the Jewish people.